So great to be here to see all of y'all, and a real pleasure. So what I want to do is share with you a little bit of what I've learned about the shortleaf pine-oak-hickory system of North Louisiana. I'm really an authority on, I'll say that about myself, on longleaf pine, but this is one of my very favorite native forest systems, and I know a little bit about it, so I'm going to share you a little bit of what I know about it with you today. I want to start with this, and apologize that the screen seems so far back, but this is actually an old map produced by Dr. Charles Moore in 1896. And what it's exhibiting is the distribution of shortleaf pine, just shortleaf pine, but in different places mixed in different quantities with hardwoods. So what I want to draw your attention to in this old map from the late 1800s is this dark area right in here in northwestern Louisiana, southeastern Arkansas, southwestern Oklahoma, and northeastern Texas. That area is really dark. And so what he's indicating with that is that the shortleaf pine forest, woodlands of that area, were really very well stocked. They were probably, this was the heart of the longleaf, of the shortleaf pine range. I'm going to say longleaf, forgive me, I'm talking about shortleaf. So I have this quote here: west of the Mississippi River, north of the region of longleaf pine, the shortleaf pine is found most abundant and in fullest perfection. The forest of shortleaf pine in northwestern Louisiana, Arkansas, and northeastern Texas are scarcely surpassed in their timber wealth. So these were tremendous forests at that time. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what happened to those, but first I want to go to this map of the ecoregions of Louisiana produced by Daigle et al. In 2006. I was a co-author on this map. And note the shortleaf-oak-hickory area up here in northwestern Louisiana, that it abuts what was and is still in a fair bit on Kisatchie, longleaf pine. So this area that's shown in one color was greatly dominated by mixed shortleaf pine oak hickory forests. There were other types intermingled. There were occasional pure hardwood forests in the uplands, and there were occasional pure shortleaf pine forests. And how those came about, you can talk about and debate. In fact, I was talking to John Michael Kelly earlier about how some of that happened. But regardless, this area up there was greatly dominated by a shortleaf oak hickory or upland hardwood forest. This map is kind of a generalized map of the geology of Louisiana. And SOH is kind of our buzzword for shortleaf oak hickory. And what I'm indicating here is that the natural variants of shortleaf oak hickory were driven primarily by what I'm calling physiographic setting. And that is surface geology, and that's what this is showing. And that area up there was mainly what's called the tertiary, deposits of the tertiary period. The soils that developed on that geology were varied. They varied from sandy loams to gravelly loams to deep sands to clays, acidic and calcareous clays. So these soils produce a lot of variation in the system. Landform is another significant component of what's driving these variations of type. Fire exposure kind of runs with landform, and I can get into why. Flats, fire can carry across. More dissected landscapes, fire has a harder time crossing rivers. So fire exposure is a direct result, really, of landform. And then, of course, hydrology is a major factor. Within types, variation is driven. One of the main drivers was regeneration dynamics, or is, and that's not my term for it, and I could have on a whole nother talk about what that is, but also disturbance dynamics. So the shortleaf pine-oak-hickory woodlands of North Louisiana, here's some factoids. Historically an open woodland of shortleaf and upland hardwoods with not much loblolly pine. Loblolly pine, the old accounts clearly indicate, was relegated to lower slopes, small streams, mixed with hardwoods. It does intermix with shortleaf upslope, and you can see that quite commonly where you have a more or less semi-natural situation on the landscape. Originally 5 to 7 million acres. That's not just North Louisiana, that's statewide. In northwest Louisiana, it was about 4 to 6 historically. And as you indicated, Eric, shortleaf can live to over 200 years, approach 300 years, so it's one of the oldest living conifers in the state. And here's something that I realized studying longleaf pine and shortleaf pine quite a number of years ago. It's easier to find a relatively high quality longleaf stand than a high quality shortleaf pine-oak-hickory stand. They've just become extremely rare. They've suffered greater relative loss in Louisiana than longleaf pine. Is anybody here from northwest Louisiana? Do any of you have shortleaf pine on your land? I have one hand. You're a very lucky man. I'd like to talk to you later.
There's a few near Lake Faribault too, which is kind of in the central.
Right. Okay. Yeah, it's in that region though, right? On that map I showed? Right. So shortleaf pine, as was longleaf pine, was born of fire. Fire is a critical driving force that created this forest type and maintained it. Here are my estimated historic fire frequencies of Louisiana's major native forest, and you'll see longleaf pine, the first two. About every 1 to 3 years, we estimate, fire went through the ground, across the ground, surface fires they're called, of the longleaf pine. Shortleaf pine, every 4 to 8 years, and I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. These other types had less fire or not much fire at all. Mixed hardwood loblolly was in that landscape on lower slopes along small streams, and then upland hardwood forests, not really so much of that up there. But the key here is these really most fire-maintained forest types. Where did the fire come from? You get in a big debate with fire ecologists. Did lightning do it? Did Native Americans do it? They both did it. Native Americans probably burned, let me just say first, lightning. The main fires that came from lightning came in the spring and the early summer. The fire scar studies clearly show that. But the Native Americans perhaps burned more commonly later in the year. So that season of burning can affect the structure and composition of a forest. So they could have affected the forest. So maybe it does matter, but the reason I put that there is because we know that fire is needed in this system, and we know we need to burn it a good bit. Back to shortleaf pine burning every 4 to 8 years. Well, Dr. Stambaugh and others in 2007 found that burning every 1 to 4 years promotes establishment of young shortleaf pine, but longer intervals between burns of 8 to 12 years are needed for continued recruitment and survival. Therefore, a staggered burn regime is really needed to promote for a long term a shortleaf hardwood stand. What does fire do? So obviously it kills, or top kills, and repeated burning will kill off-site shrubs. When I'm saying off-site, it's things that were not historically, they're native, but they were not historically. All right, we're 9:45. How long do we have? Okay, plenty of time. So these natives have come up the slope out of the bottoms when fire was taken out. I'm going to talk more about that. So it would kill these off-site native shrubs, hardwoods, and pines over time. It stimulates flowering and seed production of many grasses and wildflowers, especially early growing season burns, and I can get into all that, but I won't have time today. It prepares an open seed bed, which is actually bare soil for shortleaf and herbs to regenerate. It removes the smothering duft that increases herbaceous plant species diversity by giving the seeds a place to germinate. This is really interesting. It shocks. There's something called thermal shock, that the heat will actually shock these legume seeds and promote them to germinate. And it creates these open conditions required by many wildlife species. And these open woodland, open pineland woodland species, a lot of them are in decline, particularly birds. This is the list of the main upland hardwoods that were recorded with the original shortleaf. And these are fire-resistant hardwoods. So blackjack oak, post oak, southern red oak, black hickory, mockernut hickory, and white oak. How do these species withstand fire? One way is to have this thick bark with these fissures that insulates the living vascular cambium below the bark. It kind of reduces the heat that gets to the cambium. So this is your real soldiers out there as far as the hardwoods in the upland shortleaf. These are fire-sensitive hardwoods, recorded occasionally in the uplands, but for the most part relegated to lower slopes and stream bottoms that didn't burn that much. I'm not going to read the whole list. So it's a whole number of these other hardwood species. What happened in this landscape? Well, the early settlers, beginning in the early 1800s, came into this landscape, and they initially practiced subsistence farming and made small clearings in the forest to farm in. This is actually a picture I took near Kiefer Prairie. This old man's name is Amos Leeper. He's got his mule out, but I thought this was a great representation of maybe what it looked like, these old early settlers. But by the late 1800s, Eugene Hilgard produced a report in 1881 on the cotton production in Louisiana. And by the late 1800s, many thousands of acres in the uplands of North Louisiana were in agriculture, mainly cotton and corn. So I've heard a number of natural resource professionals through the years say all of North Louisiana was in agriculture back in the 1800s. That's not true. There were quite a number of areas that were not because of topography, excessively rocky ground. So there were a lot of places not put into agriculture. But it was one of the major forces that brought about the loss of shortleaf-oak-hickory forest. What else happened? The timber industry. Another major reason, this thing switches automatically at this point. It's okay, I was ready to go this way. So that heyday of the logging of virgin forest was from 1870 or so to 1920. And when they liquidated the virgin stands, there were some that had been cut before that, obviously, if they were thousands of acres, many thousands of acres in agriculture in the 1880s. So there was some cutting that had gone on before this. But when the railroad came to town, came to the woods, that's when it really started to go down. What else happened? Smokey, bless his heart. This campaign started in the 1940s. It was led by well-intentioned but misinformed government and other officials. It helped create a mindset in the public that all fire is bad. It led to fire suppression over vast areas and a dramatic degradation and loss of fire-dependent habitats. So agriculture combined with the timber industry combined with loss of fire were the three main forces that led to the loss, dramatic loss of our upland shortleaf-oak-hickory forest. But thanks to, well, let me just show you these. There were major campaigns to stop fire back then. It was considered evil. It was bad. But thankfully, a lot of natural resource professionals started to realize fire is actually part of these systems like longleaf and shortleaf and others, so we need to start promoting fire. And Smokey has actually come a long way. If you notice his motto, what he says now, he says, he doesn't say only you can prevent forest fires, only you can prevent wildfires. He really should say, use fire wisely. But he's come a long way. Here's one of the things, how shortleaf pine is adapted to fire. It's the second most adapted of all the southern pines, second to longleaf pine to fire. And so it resprouts readily up to a fairly sizable size, pretty big size, up to maybe 4 inches in diameter, up to 10 or 12, 15 feet tall. It can resprout. So this gives shortleaf a major advantage over loblolly pine where fire is frequent, because loblolly doesn't do this. Hardwoods also will resprout. So therefore, and I've come up with this theory, and it's yet to be proven. I think that shortleaf keeps getting top killed by a fire, it resprouts, every time it's making bigger roots. And so when it comes back, it's growing faster. It's getting ready for the next fire until it eventually gets big enough to take the next fire. This is the physiological feature of shortleaf pine that allows it to resprout. It's called this basal crook. And there are special reproductive buds in this area on older seedlings and young saplings that will readily resprout after fire. This ability to resprout is shared by hardwoods. So that, both of these upland hardwoods and the shortleaf pine being able to resprout, that's how they could co-occur in a mixed stand in these uplands. So what's happened in these stands from historic conditions, due to lack of fire, there's been a major shift to more fire-intolerant species. Loblolly pine is greatly dominant over shortleaf pine in the vast majority of places where shortleaf was historically dominant. There's been a shift to a closed forest structure from open woodland. And this is a major one for me and all people that care about biodiversity in these areas, is the loss of this rich, robust native ground cover, or the prairie under the trees. And then the loss of open pineland wildlife. There are a few acres or a few areas that remain in pretty good shape. This is a picture I took some years ago in Jackson Bienville, WMA, in Jackson Parish. It's being managed for red-cockaded woodpeckers. So they have taken out all the hardwoods. That's part of their management guidance. I tend to disagree with that because these forests historically had hardwoods, and some reason the RCWs was still able to handle the hardwoods in the stand. So it's in pretty good shape. The ground cover was in pretty good shape. This is an area owned by the Nature Conservancy we call Summerfield Springs up in Claiborne Parish. So this is what it looked like after a lot of fire and logging and herbicide work. So pretty good shape. So I'm going to go now into some of the major ground cover components that's in this system. Little bluestem, which you touched on, Eric. This was and is in the remnant good stands the matrix grass of the great majority of the upland shortleaf-oak-hickory woodlands. So it was the dominant grass, and it shared dominance with some other bluestems, and this is one of Johnny and I's favorite, Elliott's bluestem, Andropogon gyrans, and then also big bluestems. So these were there, and there were a whole variety of other grasses. These were the fire carrier in this system. When the fire got going, it was mainly burning through the grasses. That's what was carrying the fire. But a whole variety of other things, prairie blazing star, Lychus pycnostachya. There's another Lychus that's common in the sandier zones called Lychus elegans, elegant blazing star up in North Louisiana. Tall coneflower. Thank you, Larry, for this photo. You recognize it? This is your picture, Larry. Tephrosia virginiana, goat's root, another. So I'm going in the order of grasses were the most common in these ground covers, followed by composites. And I started to put in a lot more pictures than I wish I had, but this is probably going to be enough. So you got grasses, and then you have composites or things in the sunflower family, and then you have legumes. Lots of things in the genus Desmodium. You can pick out your favorite. Common name, tick trefoils, tick clover, hitchhiker's beggar lice. Who calls it beggar lice? Who calls it hitchhikers? Okay, anyway. Then another legume that's in this system, Ozark milk vetch, Astragalus distortus. Astragalus is actually a very, very large genus in the West. Many loco weed you might have heard of, that's in the genus Astragalus. But there's some in this shortleaf system here. White-flowered milkweed. These milkweeds can be a key component. Obviously, they're important for monarch butterflies and other critters. I actually took this picture up at Johnny's place. It's called Wafer Creek Ranch. He's got a really incredible population of this Asclepias variegata on his property. And this is perhaps the prettiest of all the milkweeds, butterfly weed, Asclepias tuberosa. Also in what you would call relatively high quality ground cover in shortleaf. And this bee balm, and there's other common names, Monarda fistulosa. I'm calling this the Wafer Creek Ranch variant. Do you remember collecting the seeds for this, Johnny?
Yeah.
This is actually up there at his place. And I grew it from seed, and I shared some with Tammany and some other folks, hoping it would retain this incredible character of these burgundy or mauve bracts that subtend the flowers. The ones we grew, did yours show that? Mine did not. So it may be something about the soil conditions. So an incredible plant that's scattered up there in those shortleaf oak hickory woodlands. Another mint, that was a mint, white-top mountain mint, Pycnanthemum malbescens. This plant is a total magnet for bees and wasps. They love this thing. We have it in our yard, and we've seen 10 to 12 different kinds of wasps on it at one time. Hemiparasites, which are plants that are partially parasitic on the roots of other plants, and the family Scrophulariaceae, or used to be that family. They could have changed it. The taxonomists are very busy these days, it seems. I learned all these old names, and I stick with them. And this is one of the prettiest, showiest ones you'll see up there. It's what I call Pinewoods lily. It's actually in the iris family, Alophia drummondii. And this one, which is kind of fudging to say it's really characteristic of the shortleaf oak hickory, but it's just downslope. It is at Wafer Creek Ranch, and it was at one time in the same family as huckleberries, the Ericaceae. And then taxonomists came to their senses and said, wait a minute, this is just too weird, too different. It's not in that family. It's in the Monotropaceae now. It's genus, Monotropa uniflora. A good friend of Nell and I, Susan Carr, got her doctorate some years ago, and we worked with her on research in Louisiana, and then she did research elsewhere across the Southeast. And one of the things she did was compare the shortleaf ground cover diversity to longleaf pine ground cover diversity. And what she found is that the shortleaf were in good condition the ground cover can rival that of longleaf pine ground cover diversity. The longleaf, all of her graphs clearly show it's a little bit more, but what this is saying is shortleaf pine, oak hickory woodlands can have really rich ground cover communities. A couple of embedded communities that are associated, and showed you the map and said there's other types within this broad region of shortleaf-oak-hickory. This is a really special one that's scattered around, and this one, calcareous woodland, and the associated calcareous prairies. These are in Caldwell Parish at the Nature Conservancy's Copenhagen Preserve. And so the woods have shortleaf pine as the dominant conifer, but mixed with a lot of really interesting hardwoods. There's more rare plants at this preserve, and unfortunately for you, it's not open to the public to visit. You could sneak in. I didn't say that. You could talk to somebody with TNC to go, but it is just the most incredible place.
It is in the Northeast Louisiana naturalists know how to get you in.
Okay. Let's get up with her. She'll.
Get up with me, yeah.
This place is unbelievable. This tree is one of the many unique plants that only grow at Copenhagen. This is Oglethorpe oak, Quercus oglethorpensis, a globally rare oak. And as far as I know, it's only known to grow in Louisiana at Copenhagen, or that general area of Caldwell Parish. This one I've never seen has also been recorded there, perhaps by Dr. Ardell Thomas, who's now gone away from us, bless his soul. He was a great field botanist in Louisiana. And this is Campanulastrum americanum tall bellflower, considered state rare since only known from the Copenhagen area. Echinacea purpurea, purple coneflower, you see it in everybody's yards, right, all over the place. But growing natively in Louisiana, it's very rare. Only in these calcareous clays. It's there at Copenhagen and a few other places in the state. Another really unique type, driven by unusual, you might say, not common soil conditions, deep sands. And we call this habitat Western Xeric Sandhill Woodland. And we find it most commonly in the far northwest part of the range in Louisiana, in northern Caddo, Myra, Ida, up in that zone. There's other places this is around, but this is a really interesting one that also has a variety of plants that are only found in these deep sands, such as Astragalus soxmaniorum, a globally rare milk vetch. There's a whole variety of these I could show pictures of, really cool ones. And this one, I love the scientific name, Tetragonotheca ludoviciana. Say it with me, Tetragonotheca ludoviciana. Okay, Louisiana, I hate the common name, Louisiana squarehead, but it's restricted to these deep sands. And then an oak that grows there, Quercus arkansana, Arkansas oak, which is a rare oak in the state. It's also considered globally rare. And the leaves look like a cross, if you see it, like a cross between water oak and blackjack oak. What's going on today? So overgrown, of what people call natural looking forests. They're way overgrown. There's been no fire. They're ate up with brush in the understory. A lot of off-site species, lack of fire. Then loblolly pine plantations are everywhere. Loblolly pine is the most common tree in Louisiana these days, thanks to the forest industry. They love it because of the fiber production that comes from these stands. And I get that part of it. But what's happening with planting these loblolly pines everywhere, it's hybridizing, outcrossing with shortleaf pine, creating these hybrids, which are not as fit. And so there's been research on how you deal with that problem if you're trying to do restoration in shortleaf. Frequent burning will kill these hybrids. Since it's got the loblolly in it, it seems to not have the basal crook. So frequent burning will control these hybrids. But it is a major issue. So we're talking ecological restoration, and this is kind of segueing toward Johnny. What does restoration mean? It means, the basic definition, putting something back the way it was before. But the Society for Ecological Restoration came up with a little bit more technical definition. It is the process of assisting the recovery of an ecosystem that has been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. So how you approach an area to restore it all depends on the starting conditions. And so someone who's learned these different starting conditions and the suite of different methods or actions you can take to try to remedy that, to move it to where you want to go, there's not a lot of people who are doing that in this area. There's some now, more and more all the time. But this is what they run into: overgrown, fire-suppressed stands, dominated by off-site native species, pine plantations, and then exotic species that I'm not even going to talk about, but that's a problem in a lot of places. Desired forest conditions, an open woodland with shortleaf pine, this is what we're wanting to get to. Open woodland with shortleaf pine and various upland hardwoods dominating the site, mixed in variable ratios. An open stand with multiple age and size classes of shortleaf pine and hardwoods, and variable stand density. And all of this, we could talk a lot about each one of these points. A diverse ground cover of native grasses and forbs, minimal invasive non-native species present, and few native weedy species. And the cover of native shrubs will be minimal and patchy throughout the area. Further segueing to Johnny. I met Johnny either it was late 2005 or early 2006. He had contacted the Nature Conservancy at that time, almost 20 years ago now, saying, hey, I think I got something pretty special up here and I want somebody to come look at it. So I went up, met with Johnny, and we toured around his property. And I indeed saw that Johnny did have a lot of an area with incredible potential for shortleaf restoration. One of the main things he had, and still has, is a lot of old shortleaf, older than 100 years, on this 200 to 300 acres that he's working in to restore. So I wrote this plan, sent it to Johnny in March of 2006, and he took it from there, buddy. I mean, it's amazing what he's done, and he's going to talk to you about it. We went into a little bit more detail, or I did, in that restoration plan for Johnny, and I'm not going to read every one of these bullet points of desired forest conditions, but it basically amplifies what I showed you just a bit ago. What are the tools and methods we use to restore? Prescribed fire, obviously, has to get back, but that has to be done in the right way, in the right schedule. Fire, and I meant to mention this earlier, there are three main components of fire that drive the composition and structure of an area. It's seasonality, the season of burning, the frequency of burning, how often you burn a place, and the intensity of the burns. And we could talk a long time about each one of those, but fires, like I mentioned quickly, it's not the same. Every fire is a little different. But you have to reapply fire. Then carefully controlled logging of off-site trees. You got to get these trees out of the way somehow. They got to go. You got to plant trees if there's no seed trees of shortleaf or the hardwoods. And then native ground cover plantings as necessary. So this, restoring native ground cover, is the biggest challenge we have in restoring highly degraded woodlands, longleaf pine or shortleaf pine. You're hoping when you start opening up, you get a lot of response from residual species hanging on in the bud bank, perhaps not the seed bank. A lot of people think a lot of things come back from the seed bank. They don't. A lot of these highly conservative species, we call them, do not readily come back. They don't have a really strong seed bank. Things are hanging on in what's called a bud bank. And Johnny has seen this on his place, and he may talk about that. So, but it's a real challenge, because if you don't get a lot of these things you're looking for to come back, how do you get them back? Where do you get the seeds? And where do you find local ecotype seeds to do this work? Ground cover restoration is it is the biggest challenge in any of this restoration in these highly diverse ground cover woodlands. I will say the crown jewel of shortleaf-oak-hickory woodland restoration in Louisiana is Wafer Creek Ranch, owned by Johnny. It's in Lincoln Parish, north of Ruston. He's done an incredible amount of work. Here's another picture. He has gone a long way. I mean, I don't have pictures of what it looked like when it started, Johnny. Maybe you will show that. But it was really overgrown with brush. It had too many loblolly pines. So he's gone a long way in pushing this thing toward the desired condition. This was taken last November on our trip with Johnny to visit his place, try to get up at least once or twice a year at Old Pines Bluff at Wafer Creek. And here's Nelwyn showing one of those old shortleafs, a little love. So without any further ado, I want to introduce the maestro himself, the man who has conducted and led the restoration of Wafer Creek Ranch, to tell us all about how he did it, what he did. Come on up, Johnny.
Okay. Yeah, Latimore had all the brains, and he had the great vision, and I had to do all the damn work. So.
True.
But, man, this stuff blows my mind. But, so Wafer Creek Ranch is a 16-year-old restoration of the historic grassland community, woodland and grassland community in Lincoln Parish, and it's a part of the Upper West Gulf Coastal Plain. And it is a woodland, a shortleaf pine, oak hickory woodland plant community. And it's extinct. So what happened? Well, Latimore touched on that with agriculture. There was a lot of plowing and a lot of fields around back then. And to me, it seems like fire suppression was the worst, though. The best way I know of to make a grassland go extinct is to starve it from fire. And then later on, there's this industrial forestry, loblolly pine monoculture, which has been so destructive to our mixed forest in North Louisiana and in oil and gas development. So the shortleaf pine, oak hickory woodland is divided into 3 levels: the grassland, which is the understory, the mid-story shrub level, and the overstory trees. I'm not near where it. And so let's go to the trees. And there are only, Latimore's touched on this, there are only 8 card-carrying, I mean the real card-carrying tree members, and they are trees of relative fire resistance due to their bark characteristic. So there are 5 oaks, 2 hickories, and 1 pine tree. And 7 of these 8 species could also thrive downslope in the mixed hardwood loblolly forest community, a forest, except for the blackjack oak. And the blackjack oak requires so much sun that it can only thrive in a woodland or savanna. So, here are our oaks and hickories. There's post oak, white oak here with the flat bark plates. There's our blackjack oak with the boxing gloves leaves. Southern red oak, black oak, mockernut hickory, and black hickory, like these big guys over here on the right. And then there's the shortleaf pine, the grand potentate of the overstory. The shortleaf pines towered, this is a Latimore quote, by the way, the shortleaf pines towered over the fire-resistant hardwoods, forming a super canopy. I can see Russia from my house, too. Folks, Latimore back me up. I can't tell you what a rare scene this is. This is those 8 species, more or less, in this photograph.
Wow.
And this is in a woodland. And this is what looks like the relic old growth shortleaf pine oak hickory overstory. And there are significant numbers of 100-plus-year-old shortleaf pines. This is a very, very, very rare scene in Louisiana, as Latimore can tell you. So, but back in 2005, when I brought Latimore up here to look at it, it was all cluttered up with other trees. Well, of course, they were the fire-sensitive species that were able to grow up due to fire suppression. So we're moving on to the mid-story. There are important representatives such as plums, huckleberries, blueberries, buckeye, buckthorn, hawthorns. And the woodland ground cover is a fire-sustained grassland ground cover. And this is where the gold is. This is where the biodiversity is. There's so much more biodiversity down there in that grassland than there is in the forest. So they're highly species-rich plant and animal communities, and you might call them hotspots of biodiversity. So this is little blue stem. Little blue stem is the dominant species of this ecosystem. And I want to do something here throughout the rest of this talk, and that's to stress the connection as best I can with plants and animals, primarily insects. Because, you know, plants depend on insects for pollination, but insects depend on plants for food. And insects eat plants from the soil all the way up to the blossoms. And so there's a huge connection in them. Then you have to bring in, you know, higher up the food chain, and reptiles, amphibians, land birds, all are totally dependent in their life cycle on insects. Seabirds might be okay because the mamas feed the babies the fish. But land birds absolutely require insects. Hummingbirds feed their babies insects. Seed-eating birds feed their babies insects. So this is so important. So, you know, I think of this, Latimore was defining restoration ecology, but I kind of like to think of it as in refurbishing ecosystems. And so anyway, back to the little blue. Oh, let me go back on that. So little bluestem is a perennial bunch grass, and that means that in the spring, a little bunch of leaves start coming up, and they grow and grow and grow until about July. They start sending up these spikes here that support the blooms later to become the seed heads. And also, little bluestem is host plant for a wood nymph butterfly and several species of skipper butterflies. And these are the raceme inflorescence here, and it's a little stem going out. It's kind of bow-shaped in the little bluestem. And these are aligned by the seed spikelets that contain the seed. You have more or less the same program here with split-beard bluestem. It's a beautiful, beautiful grass in the fall. It has these pink stems and these fluffy white inflorescences. And so with split-beard bluestem, you have twin racemes that go out, and they split off in two directions, hence split-beard bluestem. And yeah, Latimore and I love this grass, and Nelwyn, this is just the coolest grass. This is Elliott's bluestem, and it has these really unique structures here called space, and they're composed of these spiky leafy bracts, and they open up and they reveal the seed spikelets in here. And Wafer Creek Ranch, these things kind of get real rusty colored. They're just beautiful, and also they come real late. You don't get the stage of growth until on into the winter, early winter. I don't know if anybody else has seen that. Larry, you seen that? Larry, Alain, have you seen? Do you see that with Elliott's bluestem in other parts of the state? Yeah. Okay. It's real late on Wafer Creek Ranch. And then the 60-mile-an-hour grass here is drop seed grass, genus Sporobolus. And if you're driving along at 60 miles an hour and you look in the ditch and these flashy open leaf sheaths will shine back at you, and you can see that it's 60 miles an hour. and this is really a beautiful grass, slender Indian grass. It has these characteristic seed heads that droop over. And this is broom sedge grass, Andropogon virginicus. It is a native, weedy pioneer, and it is a friend to those who wish to restore a grassland, because it is your surrogate fire carrier until little bluestem gains dominance. And little bluestem is a conservative species, and so it just sits there like a dunce, and it doesn't make babies. And so here now I've been, but broom sedge just spreads like wildfire, and it comes up and it gives you a grassland, and it's such a good fire carrier. So it's been 16 years. Wafer Creek Ranch is a 16-year-old restoration now. And that's a young restoration, but it's been long enough for me to see a lot of changes. And I'm still waiting on that little blue stem to take hold. It's getting there. It's almost, you know, you can see the wave coming now. But it really takes a while. And so thank goodness for broom sedge grass all this time. And by the way, broom sedge grass just happens to be a host plant for at least one beetle species, moth species, and butterfly species. Broom sedge grass has not gotten enough respect over the years, and I don't like that. I really respect broom sedge. Okay, the lagoons. Nitrogen fixers, nectar and pollen providers, and high protein pea producers. We have several species of Desmodium on Wafer Creek Ranch, and they are a nectar and pollen food source for insects, and the seeds of the low mints are food for birds. And this is a low mint, which is a pea pod that is segmented like this. They dry up and break off, and that's how we get our beggar lice. Have you ever seen a bumblebee walk backwards? You can do it if you hang around climbing butterfly pea long enough. Bumblebees this is a great bumblebee plant, by the way. Bumblebees will light on this flower, and they will crawl up under this collapsed football structure here called a floral banner, and you can just see their little butts sticking out. And then they'll gather up what's available there, and then they'll put it in reverse and just walk straight out backwards. Like, wow, you know, that's pretty cool. So, and this is a really interesting plant, just old partridge pea, you know. I mean, that's a cool plant. I mean, the blossoms produce pollen for bumblebees, but they don't produce nectar. But these plants have extra floral nectaries, which are located at the leaf petioles. So then they're petiolar nectaries, and these petiolar nectaries attract a whole different subset of insects, such as ants, sweat bees, flies, wasps, and on. So that's a cool plant. Plus it is loaded with pea pods, and that's a great food source for birds and mammals, small mammals in the winter. And bush lespedeza is host plant to a moth, two moth and butterfly species, including the clouded sulfur and gray hair streak butterflies. Rhincosias, the snout beans, both snout beans, this is prairie snout bean, both snout beans have these cool yellow flowers, and both snout beans produce numerous beans, as you might expect. This is twining snout bean. The mints, this is Monarda fistulosa. It is an excellent pollinator plant, as we all know, and it provides nectar and pollen to hummingbirds and insects, and it is host to several moth species. You can't see it, but I saw a bee, and I'm going to zoom in on him. So a bumblebee, we know this is Monarda fistulosa. A bumblebee will stash nectar and pollen on its hind leg. It forms what's called a pollen sac, and it'll take that pollen sac back to the hive, distribute it to the larvae, and then it heads out again to gather up more pollen and nectar. So they really are busy. And we have Monarda punctata here, or spotted bee balm, called so because the tubular flowers here have spots on them, brown spots, and say hello to the monarch butterfly. I love this wildflower. It's one of my favorites. It gets about 5 or 6 feet tall, stands upright, azure blue sage, and it is a good pollinator plant, as you can tell by this bumblebee likes it. It attracts both hummingbirds as well as insect pollinators. And like Latimore said, this whiteleaf mountain mint, I mean, this stuff attracts. This is a convention center. There are conventions of pollinators on these plants, like this red-banded hairstreak here on whiteleaf mountain mint. The milkweeds. We know the milkweeds produce a cardiac glycoside that most insects find to be noxious, except for the milkweed insects that include a variety of milkweed beetles, a variety of milkweed bugs, the queen butterfly, the imperial monarch butterfly, and the tussock moth. That cardinalide, though, does confer us a degree of protection to both the insect larvae and to the adults. This plant, white flower milkweed, is spreading on Wafer Creek Ranch, and it's due to the restoration. Well, with increased numbers of milkweeds and increased numbers of caterpillars, we have, and increased numbers of monarch butterflies, I do believe this is an example of restoration effecting the rescue of an imperiled species. Now, ain't that cool? This is a American lady butterfly. She is not a milkweed insect. However, she's here to demonstrating to us, this is white flower milkweed, she's here demonstrating to us that the blossoms of milkweed are fair game for all pollinators. And also we have butterfly milkweed and blunt leaf milkweed on Wafer Creek Ranch. And tell you, am I ever going to get passion flowers? We have both yellow passion flower and purple passion flower on Wafer Creek Ranch. This is purple passion flower. It provides nectar and pollen to insects and hummingbirds, and it is host to our fritillary butterflies, such as the variegated fritillary and the Gulf fritillary butterfly, which is Louisiana's official state butterfly. And sunflowers. Did you know that black-eyed Susans are host plant to bordered patch and checker spot butterflies? Now you do. And Heterotheca subaxillaris is what I call the other camphor weed, as opposed to stinky socks plukia. And so if you pluck a leaf from Heterotheca and crush it, it smells just like camphor. It's so aromatic, so fragrant. But this plant is also a nectar source for insects, and it is host to some fly and moth species. So we have 3 species of Verbicina on Wafer Creek Ranch that I know of. All 3 are host plants. All 3 provide nectar and pollen to insects, and all 3 are called frost plants because in sub-freezing weather, these curious ice ribbons will ooze out of the stem bases. That's pretty weird, huh? And so this is a pipevine swallowtail on prairie blazing star. We have 3 blazing stars on Wafer Creek Ranch, 3 species, and so this is prairie. Tall blazing star gets up to about 5 feet tall, and they get sometimes these stems get top heavy and they'll just flop over like this, but that's tall. And finally, elegant blazing star is my favorite. It blooms in the spring, it blooms in the fall, whereas tall blazing star and prairie blazing star bloom in the dead of summer, centered around the time of July. And there's our state butterbird coming in for a landing. So, this is rice button aster, and this is mist flower, as you all know. These are real common. And so both of these plants are host plants to insects. Both of these plants provide a lot of pollen and nectar to insects. And both of these plants have a low coefficient of conservatism. So the moral to the story, in my opinion, is that just because you have a low coefficient of conservatism and are a little bit weedy does not mean you are not of extreme importance to the ecosystem. And goldenrods, this is a giant goldenrod. It's hard to see in this picture here, but these young robust plants will have very whitish, so-called glaucous stems, and that really makes that an easy goldenrod to identify for that reason. We have sweet goldenrod with its little skinny leaves. If you pluck one of these leaves and smash it up, it smells just like licorice, which is an excellent field mark. Okay, this is Louisiana goldenrod. Solidago ludoviciana. It's a good Italian goldenrod. But this goldenrod, you know, we folks in Louisiana, we folks in the South, throughout the South, have serious botanical bragging rights. And that's because we have so many endemic species. I think the only thing that ties the South might be southern coastal California. I don't know. But anyway, we have a bunch. And this Louisiana goldenrod here is endemic to the region of Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas. And you can identify this goldenrod by these long, kind of drooping racemes. But the best way to identify it is fat leaves at the base. So if you have long, drooping racemes or bow-shaped racemes and fat leaves at the base, you might be a Louisiana goldenrod. And Western rough goldenrod, called rough because the leaves are sandpaper scratchy. And this is Solidago petiolaris, downy ragged goldenrod. This might be my favorite goldenrod. I love this goldenrod. It produces nectar and pollen for bees, butterflies, moth beetles, flies. It's host plant to moss bees see, and birds eat the seeds. What more can you ask of pretty little goldenrod? This is Solidago rugosa. Rugo means wrinkled, and these leaves are really seriously wrinkled due to the prominent veining pattern that they have. And they are host plants to moss bees see and other insects. We will top off our goldenrods with flat top goldenrod here and move on. This is an open woodland on Wafer Creek Ranch that's in one of those ag zones that Latimore was telling you about. This is plowed ground, likely cotton grew here many years ago. But it's typical for these zones like this to be sparse in those 8 overstory members of the shortleaf Pine-Oak-Hickory woodland. And part of that reason is surely due to fire suppression, but that ground was plowed. What was there was just totally destroyed. So they tend to be, it's really difficult to find good numbers of older growth overstory members, shortleaf Pine-Oak-Hickory overstory members. But this is the grassland, and it is in a non-ag damaged area. It was never plowed in the past. And what do you have? You have these old growth black hickories here. Some of these black hickories in here are well over 150 years old or so. Got to be. And where once was a dense and scrambled forest is now a woodland grassland. And Latimore, it doesn't show as good as your photo did, I don't think, but you can see those purple bracts, flower bracts. See them?
Forgot my binoculars.
Did he lie to me? And this little blue stem here before it sends up its spikes. And so, what is this? Is this a wildflower garden? Well, no, it's not. It's the Wafer Creek Ranch grassland restoration. So, what do we have here? Well, we have those drooping racemes of Louisiana goldenrod. We have the skinny leaves and flowers of sweet goldenrod here. It's just barely coming into bloom. There's another one down here. Gosh, it's hard to see, but there's some yellow buds over here that are the buds of Chrysopsis pilosa or soft golden aster. Down here we have partridge pea. Little blue stem is here in the foreground, and there's elegant blazing star and our white leaf mountain mint. So it kind of looks like a butterfly garden or wildflower garden. Okay, when you're out and about in the grassland and you come across beech false foxglove or false foxglove, stop and look down and see if you can find common buckeye caterpillars. And there's one right there. This is a favorite host plant of common buckeye caterpillars, the Aguilus fasciculata false foxglove. So it's a favorite host plant for common buckeyes, and there they are in all their glory on prairie blazing star. And there's giant swallowtail butterfly here. This is the biggest butterfly species in North America. And beetles are pollinators. This is a flower longhorn beetle, and this is here's another longhorn beetle, and I don't know who these two guys here over on the side are. What's that?
There's 4 of them on there.
Well, yeah, I can see two, but these don't look like the same animals. Yeah. And these are emerald flower scarab beetles caught in a private moment. A lot of pollination going on here. And another flower longhorn beetle. And this is my sidekick, Opal. I could not have done any of this work without Opal. And she was more valuable than Latimore, I can tell you. And I don't know if you get to see her collar. She's got a little Louisiana Tech collar on here, so she is a supporter of higher education. Yeah. You're a tech guy? Yeah, me too. Okay. Okay, so I'll get it. This is a fundraiser. Every penny from this book goes to, in a split, to the Nature Conservancy of Louisiana and to the Land Trust for Louisiana. Now, Nelwyn, that's my favorite organization. Nelwyn McGinnis back there, Melvin. Stand up, Melvin. She's one of the founders of that organization. Yeah. Go, Mel. Yes, that is Melvin to me. So anyway, everything I've just told you is in this book on steroids. So these books they'll be in the back. I'll be going in the back, and I'll be available to anyone who wants to buy this book. And remember, it's a fundraiser. Hey, the book costs $30 retail price. I'll let you have it for $20 to $30. Feel free to kick in the other $10 because it's it's a fundraiser. So, okay, I guess that wraps me up. Thank y'all. Thank y'all.